And thanks everyone for joining us today. Very pleased that we've gotten to this point in the development of the principles, and glad to have the opportunity to describe what they are and how we hope to go forward with these. I'm here with a number of people who've contributed, and a number of you have contributed as well. But what we're going to be doing is we're going to talk a little bit about the origins of this, talk a little bit about why IPAM is trying to do this, and also then get into the substance of the principles as they stand currently, and then consider next steps. We also are pleased to have 3 discussant interventions towards the end, which hopefully will give some different perspectives on how these principles sort of fit into the AI and adaptation interface, and also can perhaps give us some perspectives on where we should go from here. So let's just start by talking a little bit about why we're here. So I think we're all aware that AI, which isn't truly AI yet, is becoming more and more a part of our daily lives. It takes concerted effort to avoid it. And also, this is permeated into the world of adaptation and adaptation metrics, monitoring, evaluation, reporting, and learning. And it can be quite helpful with a number of different things, including gathering information, organizing it, and monitoring. But there's, of course, a number of concerns over the reliability and the provenance of some of the metrics that can be derived from AI. And it can result in a lack of assurance when it comes to policy design and funding decisions. Now, while AI is growing, the need for adaptation is growing as well. And although money doesn't speak the entire story, far from it, there's some quantified numbers regarding both the need, how much of a gap there is, and how it compares to the overall climate finance flows. So the stakes are large, and the need for some way of addressing how adaptation can deploy AI, in particular for metrics and MERL, is becoming more important for validation and disclosure of methods, understanding how we can do this. And now metrics, of course, I believe all of us understand the importance of it for providing learning, providing wise finance allocation, providing a good understanding of the results of adaptation, and making good claims for all decisions that are being made. So metrics are critical in this space, and AI is definitely entering the space of adaptation metrics. The questions oftentimes relate to questions whether it will be used transparently and responsibly. And AI is already being used across the entire adaptation cycle. IPAM believes that a principle for use is that it shouldn't augment professional judgment, and it can't substitute for understanding the context and validating it from the context, considering stakeholders, and also making sure that humans are accountable. AI itself can't be accountable, unfortunately. And our concern, I think, over how AI poses risks is, I think, very, very important to understand when it comes to the quality of the data and its provenance, when it comes to understanding if there's a bias in the outputs or an exclusion of considerations, when it comes to understanding what's the origin of the outputs that AI provides. It can even create what's called hallucinations and misinformation and create its own information. It creates potential, very real privacy and security questions because it's derived from data that may not be really, should be considered public data or data that individuals want to reveal. And it also can crowd out a lot of things that I think are very important, including technical and other expertise, local stakeholder knowledge, and also ground truthing. So we've tried to design the principles to respond to these. But why IPAM? Well, first of all, let me just describe a little bit about IPAM. It's a diverse platform that focuses on metrics and MERL. It has a diversity of people who are involved from different practices, from different geographies, from different cultures, and from different mindsets. It has a metrics first sort of orientation, has no commercial AI agenda. One could argue it has an agenda in that we're concerned that AI is, if it's used, that it's used responsibly. But we think that altogether, this makes IPAM pretty well suited to ask how it should be used. Just a few things about IPAM. We convene task groups and we hold meetings like this to try to convey information that's relevant to the adaptation and the AI communities in this case. We prepared knowledge products, including something that looks at how you evaluate metrics called AMI. We've been involved in a lot of global engagements and submissions to the UNFCCC and participation in global meetings. And we've produced a number of outputs. So we feel that we're in a position where we both have the perspective and the capacity to play a role in understanding how it can really, how it can be used responsibly. But we also aren't, of course, a government regulatory body or a certification body. And I think that's very important to understand as well. Now, I'd like to hand this over to my colleague and co-author and co-lead of the AI task group within IPAM, Dr. Samraj Sahe, who's been involved in this from the very onset and brings a depth of perspectives when it comes to adaptation metrics. He's based in New Delhi. He's an independent researcher. I'd like to pass it over to you.
Yeah, well, thanks, Carl, for that for setting the context, not just for the use of AI, but for a responsible use of AI. And perhaps that's the motivation that led us to come up with these principles, specifically dedicated to adaptation metrics and MERLs. So coming on to the principles, the intent of the principle is basically to help users to show that how they are using the AI more transparently and responsibly under the human oversight, while taking into consideration the biases, especially related to data or the contextual validity and documenting the limitations. This principle is basically, it's essentially designed to serve as a guidance for the deployers or the one who uses it in their work. And that includes the researchers, technical advisors, evaluators, and MERL specialists. And also it's used, it serves as a guidance for the end users. And end users are the one who actually uses the output of the AI. And this includes planners, NGOs, policymakers. And there's a very thin line of difference between deployers and the users, especially when it comes to some of the categories like planners, evaluators, or researchers, because they can be deployers as well as the end users. So to make it clear at the very onset itself that the policy does not apply to, or it's not for the developers, it's specifically for the deployers and the end users. Next slide. So as our focus was mainly on users and deployers, so we went out for a survey to just answer some of the questions like who or who is going to use this principles, or what should be the ambit within which this principle would be applicable, or what are the risk level associated with it. And based the response that we got for this survey, it was not very surprising that almost 70% of the respondent were actually using or have been using this AI, especially the large language models like the ChatGPT, Claude, etc., in their work. But what was really intriguing was that out of those who responded that they are using this AI, nearly 70% had a very low confidence in when it comes to interpreting the results or the output of the AI. And the major concerns that they raised was that it was about the credibility and trustworthiness, or they were concerned about the level of the human oversight, and because that directly relates to the accountability, and also about the integration of the local contextualizations, because the adaptation is context specific, and that has to be the key pillar of any evaluation or any metrics or ML that you're doing. Well, from the deployer's point of view, the implementation barrier was mainly they found that it's technically complex, and at the same time there was a lack of clear provenance for many of the data sources. So next slide. Now, as you are aware, I mean, this AI has got an immense potential in fostering adaptation, and it's applied all across the adaptation cycle, right from the IVRA planning, implementation, and MERL. And it's been used for identifying the indicator or selection of the indicator across this adaptation cycle. But in addition, it can be used. It's being used for other purposes also, such as in the impact, vulnerability, and risk assessment. It's being used heavily for the synthesis of the evidence or the analysis of the complex data sets, like the satellite or the socioeconomic data for mapping vulnerability, or for the predictive modeling to assess the impacts and forecast the risks. In the planning, it's used for mainly making a choice of adaptation options and also optimizing the resource allocations. Whereas in implementation, it's being used for streamlining the project management. Yeah.
Sorry.
Previous.
Yeah.
Project management and the on-time tracking of the progress to support timely completion within the budget. And also for the MERL, it's used for tracking effectiveness, evaluate, measure, and enable learning and support reporting. Next slide. Now, having discussed about the positive side or the benefits of AI, but it comes with there are certain concerns, challenges, and trade-offs associated with it. And if you look at these challenges, it has been categorized into three main categories. There's the ethical challenges, the governance challenges, and the capacity challenges. So coming to the ethical challenges, mainly relates to the scarcity of the high quality data, especially for the low LMIC and SIDS. And because of the poor quality of the data, there's the climate modeling and long-term scenario simulations are less efficient or less credible. And at the same time, the security and the privacy concerns are very high, so that also hinders the credibility. And as Carl mentioned about the hallucination, so that's part of the problem that most of us who have used it must have faced it, where it comes up with an output which is either fabricated or even distorted, and it comes up something which doesn't even exist. But the governance, it's an algorithmic bias, because most of the data that's used for the training comes from the developed world, from the high quality data. So it's very likely that the decision that comes from the AI could favor adaptation options, metrics, or the indicators, especially focused on the developed world, and leaving behind or ignoring the developing countries, leading to inequity. There could also be a biased assessment, as the use of indicator is not equal or even across the developed and developing countries. Similarly, there will be gender and societal inequities or the lack of contextualization. And another problem that is very common is about the black box phenomena, where because of the complex output, it's difficult to make out how AI is reaching to that particular output or a particular conclusion. For the capacity, there is, of course, there's lack of expertise and knowledge about the use as well as the interpretation of the AI output. And this particularly harmful for the validation and ground truthing of this outputs. And there's also poor communication and knowledge sharing when it comes to AI outputs. Now, in addition to the challenges, we do come across these trade-offs, which is more often not talked about. But we just came up with these trade-offs and we validated it in our survey also. So the key trade-off included the conflict between AI's ability to produce high predictive accuracy while maintaining the transparency and interpretability. Likewise, standardization or the local context cannot be integrated very easily in the AI. And also the AI might look very attractive for the users and the deployers because of its simplicity, but you run a risk of compromising with the scientific rigor and technical robustness. So, next slide. Now, keeping in mind with all these challenges and the trade-offs that just I mentioned in the previous slide, we came up with this list of the principles, and some of these principles are essential, that is, they are non-negotiable and mandatory, while some are important because they are not mandatory, but they just enhances or add values to the responsible use of AI, especially in the when there is enough resources. So coming on to the essential principles from the ethical consideration, so the one of the main and the foremost requirement is to ensure that AI is to assist and not to replace the human expertise or the inputs from the stakeholders. And this can be achieved by documenting that what all task is being performed by with the help of the AI and what is being done by the humans. Similarly, the data was one of the key concern. So to come up with it requires establishment of a robust data governance framework. And this involves basically establishing a mechanism to ensure the reliability, the traceability of the data. And of course, this requires a documentation of the data provenance and conducting the basic quality checks. The other issues that was with the privacy and the data security. So it's required to ensure by the deployers to ensure a mechanism to ensure privacy and data security and the compliance, the legal compliance, and also to have a backup plan or maybe an alternative way in case of an external risk. So, and this can be achieved by access control, avoiding collecting identifiable data, or having alternative plans. Yeah, next slide. Now, from the governance perspective, one of the key concern was that what is the level of the human oversight, because that directly relates to the accountability. So the deployers should ensure that a mechanism for the human oversight and auditability, and more preference on maybe assisted, not autonomous decision making or autonomous AI. And this requires the deployers and the users to assign the name of the individuals to review all AI outputs before any decision is based on that. Now, to maintain the transparency and explainability, there should be a mechanism of disclosure, which the deployers needs to come up with. And they need to disclose that AI has been used and where and how it has been used. And the second is the explainability, which basically looks at how AI is reaching to a particular conclusion or a particular decision. And this requires prioritizing training staffs or the users to interpret the explainable AI outputs. And then one very important aspect that they need to keep in mind is about the ground truthing. And for this, it requires involving stakeholders and also the local knowledge. And when it comes to capacity, it's to have a mechanism of training or internal working guidance available for all who are using it. And for this, it can be facilitated by training, skill development, and that ensures effective utilization and interpretation of AI. Next slide. Now, as I mentioned, that some of them are not essential, but they are important principles. And one of them is about the selection of the tool, that you often come across that which tool needs to be selected, because one size fit for all doesn't work. And for that, the selection has to be based by taking into consideration the local context, the data availability, and the capacity requirement. Another one is to have a mechanism in place that would identify and mitigate the bias and inequity. And this can be achieved by testing the AI outputs across different demographic groups and reporting back the performance gap. And finally, it requires the validation and ongoing monitoring and AI supported outputs. And this would require, again, the selection of the tool with explanation features and training on the explainable AI outputs. Now, for the dissemination of the information of the knowledge, all the this maybe the audience may not perceive the reports or the whatever is being the output is being catered to them in the same way. Something that is more interesting to an scientific community may not be as useful for the as I would say the policymaker. So that has to be done by developing an audience-specific communication plan, and there has to be a mechanism for the implementation guidance and shared learning. Yeah, next slide. So this principle is not to certify that AI generated outputs are correct, or it doesn't guarantee its correctness, or it doesn't replace the expertise. But what it does is it strengthens the responsible use, credibility, and defensibility, and it supports the transparent use and the contextual validation and the known limitations. So now with that, I would end, and I just hand over to Carl to take us for what is the next uh, for the IPAM. Yeah.
Thank you, Samraj. Um, so, so what? I mean, I guess that's the question. We've come up with a document, and it should be just posted on our website now, and we can share this. I think everyone who registers, we're going to send a copy of the principles to. But why would users, and I mean both the people who use the AI and the people who use the outputs from AI, want to link to the principles? And our view is the main reason is assurance that the AI was used responsibly, not just conveniently. So it's a question of assurance. It's understanding that there's a degree of credibility to how it was used, that it was disclosed, checked, and it wasn't hidden. There's a degree of defensibility, that you've created an evidence trail for the outputs that can be used to understand them. And if things go wrong, understand why. Hopefully they won't. You have the evidence trail. Accountability is critical, that humans, not the AI, is accountable for the outputs, and that it's been undertaken in a way so that human oversight is there and the judgment is there over it. And also, as noted, assurance is the key issue for all of these things, that there's proportional assurance, that there's due diligence without implying that everything is perfect and certified as absolutely, unimpeachable, because that's impossible with both human and AI outputs. But to provide a better assurance is proportionate. The core assurance is that reasonable due diligence was applied. Not that it's all correct, but for deployers, this can help to document responsible practice, and for the users, it can help to judge whether AI-supported evidence is trustworthy enough for its intended use. So that's why. And we hope that people can understand this, that there's some value in that assurance. So I've already touched upon why IPAM, we feel that we're well placed to steward this effort. It's because this isn't only an AI issue, it's a metrics evidence issue. And we have this diversity that I mentioned. We don't have an AI stake. We're neutral. We have very different perspectives amongst the membership, but we're focused on metrics. So we're not out there to promote AI, but given that it's happening, to help the adaptation metrics community use it responsibly when it's used. So we've got these principles, but we can understand that they wouldn't necessarily be intuitively easy to apply for a variety of different deployers and users of the outputs. So that's why we're looking at 4 different broad sort of work streams that we could undertake over the next year to try to make this more usable and more understandable. They include due diligence thresholds. So in other words, what should it mean to claim alignment with the principles? What's sufficient? What's not sufficient? It's also to provide some context-specific guidance considering the variety of different applications for AI in the adaptation and neural space, and saying for these different contexts, what would be appropriate safeguards. It's thirdly to come up with some tools. This could be some prompts that could be deployed that would enhance the quality of the outputs to conform better to the principles, and checklists, potential decision trees, so that the use is applied appropriately across different contexts. And then fourthly, we'd like to test bed this with different use cases. So what specific case studies would help us to have a better understanding how good these principles are in practice? So let me just go through in a moderate degree of depth each of these 4 different potential work streams that we're going to be contemplating after this launch. So when it comes to due diligence, the core question is what should someone be able to show when they're saying that AI was used responsibly using the principles? What should be sufficient? And to address that question, we're going to probably have to think about, well, what's the minimum evidence record? And I've conveyed some potential areas there in which we can really further elaborate, well, what would be the evidence record necessary? And this could be things like describing the tools used, the data sources, how were humans, overseeing it? What were the validation checks? Were references double checked in person, for instance? Was there a review of the bias? And particularly, this is important when we're dealing in contexts where there are disadvantaged or under data in the space of the large language models out there. Those are the sorts of things that we want to try to consider would be a minimum evidence record required to show that you've been using the principles. Now, why is this important? Well, I think it's important that we don't make it overly onerous. Otherwise, people might just say, well, I was going to use the principles, but this is too much work and there's a limited budget. We need to make sure that the evidence record is good, but is not overly onerous, and so that we throw out the baby with the bathwater, as they say. Another thing that's important is credibility, is making sure that the record of checks is more than, well, I just used the principles. It has to be a little more specific than that, a lot more specific than that, for us to want to have people claim they're using the principles. And then thirdly, it's important that we undertake this in a way that's careful, where we don't oversell what the principles and what thresholds can do now. Um, do it with formal peer review through the AI task group and then consultations with outside parties. Uh, and if we want to get towards a stronger sort of role later, either IPAM or some other body, we need to make sure that what we are doing now is sufficiently robust so that we could establish something like certification later. So that's really what we want to do, is really say, well, what level of due diligence can actually help in these different spaces with no presumption of certification right now. The second thing that we're looking at doing is trying to provide some specific guidance, and we've started this work already regarding, what contexts would require different specific things be done. And there's at least two different dimensions of this. One dimension is that there are lower stakes versus higher stakes things at contexts, where on the one end, just doing a quick research, something that might help in terms of brainstorming or getting a basic idea, is a lower stake sort of guidance that might require less demanding adherence to all of the principles elements, over to very high stake analyses that relate to policy making, public reporting, and funding decisions. And then there's, of course, different activities in the middle. There's also different contexts when it comes to the types of AI, where large language models could be very different from big data analytics in terms of the guidance required. And so we want to try to think about, for each context, well, what guidance can define what should be avoided, what are the minimum checks, what good practice looks like, and then when is it necessary to escalate the activities and the human oversight across different things when it comes to technical, legal, or security issues. So that's the second work stream that we're really looking at. The third is, well, what are some tools for the due diligence that could be deployed? And these really apply to things like prompts and checklists and decision trees, but they can be different before the use, and asking, well, is AI actually the right tool for a particular task? I mean, there have been cases where, I can say, speaking as an evaluator, where perhaps appropriately at this point in time, I'm not allowed to use AI when evaluating proposals. And being able to tell people this, and then also, during use, well, what sources are being used? What models are being used? What checks are being made? Are we actually checking bias, and the context under which we're using the AI? And then after, well, what limitations are there in the outputs? And how is AI going to be disclosed to the users of the outputs? So I think the critical thing, back to a premise that we conveyed earlier in this presentation, was the tools should aid professional judgment, not replace humans. I think that's very important. And then a fourth area is really trying to ground this in reality by looking at some actual use cases. And these can be policy and project reviews. It can be evidence for evaluations. It can be selection of the indicators. It can be, how does resilience contribute to a certain assessment? It can be, how is adaptation finance decisions being made using AI as an input? And then also it could be used for, some of these technical approaches of remote sensing and vulnerability, and coupling that with AI. But those might be later stage testing, given they're a little more involved in many respects. So we want to start with some basic ones. And if anyone has any use cases you'd like to be trialed, we'd be very happy to discuss. I just want to conclude the formal presentation of Samraj by saying that the principles that we've just launched, they're really a living tool. They need to be reviewed because AI is changing adaptation and the adaptation metrics and neural space is changing. The needs in both areas are critical. So we want to make sure that we constantly observe and test and learn and update and then repeat this process. And so we're also interested in understanding the benchmark for how AI is used now and then comparing that and comparing how AI compares now to 6 months from now, because there could be big differences. So that's really a critical thing, is that the principles that you see today should not be the principles that you see in a year. So just a final ask is we hope that you want to be involved in the next phase, which is one where we want to see if you could help shape this due diligence and nominate use cases, identify potential partners for testing and refining the guidance, and give us updates on what are the developments and risks that should trigger future revisions. So we'll be seeking inputs throughout the next step. And we don't want to reopen discussion and deliberation of the principles now, because we've worked on that over the last 3 months after our last presentation. But we obviously want to have everyone involved who is interested and has a stake in this area. So with that, that concludes the sort of formal presentation of the principles and our next steps. But I'm very honored that the panel that came and gave some extremely constructive perspectives in March is back. And two of them, I hope, live. Is Mohammed? Was he able to join?
Yes, he's here.
Excellent.
Yes, I'm around.
Okay. I know there was some complexity with this whole new webinar tool that we have. One of the participants couldn't join, but has so kindly prepared a web capsule. And so to make sure that we can get that working, I'm going to ask Anne Seitzma, who's not here, to give a few words. And Anne comes a little bit outside of the adaptation metrics space, but he has experience there. He works for what's called Climate Policy Radar, and he is the Climate Justice Officer there. And it's Climate Policy Radar is a London-based nonprofit, and it builds upon open databases and AI-powered tools to support informed climate action. And one of his roles is to develop responsible AI guidelines that are practical yet ambitious. And he's worked on, as a researcher, focused on tracking global adaptation, including using AI-based indicators. And so, wish me luck as I stop sharing this and as I share his presentation.
Hi everyone, Anne Seitzma here. I work for Climate Policy Radar, and I was invited to say some very brief remarks on IPAM's principles for responsible application of AI. And I want to respond as much as possible from my own personal view as someone who helps to build these kinds of systems. And so with that in mind, it's probably useful to know what Climate Policy Radar does, the company for which I work. We're a not-for-profit, we're based in London, and we maintain a large database of climate policy documents. So that includes national laws, that includes United Nations submissions, climate court cases, all sorts. And that lands in a pile, a rather big pile, I might say, some 35,000 documents from every single country in the world, which means that no one is really going to read all of them. And in fact, it's quite difficult to find what you're looking for in a pile that is so large, right? And so for us, this is where AI often comes in. With that in mind, I think one of the things that the principles could reflect on a little bit further is how to differentiate risks from impacts. And to illustrate that, let's think of a user who's trying to use our database and is searching for something like deforestation, for example, and getting results. Now, there's a lot of AI happening in the background here, but really the risk, or rather the impact of missing a result in this long list of results is very different from if I'm searching for examples to use, for example, or I'm just curious to see what might be happening in a different country, versus if I'm doing a full systematic review, right? For a cursory search, a single missing result is not a problem. For a systematic review, it's important that we have everything. And so the AI systems is the same, the AI risks are the same, but the impacts are very different. And I think in applying these principles, keeping those kinds of differentiated impacts in mind is going to be crucial. In addition, I think it's very easy to focus on the hottest, newest models, right? But AI has been around for a while and is often already very integrated in what we do. And so to give you, again, a little peek behind the scenes of what that means for us, if you're doing that search, then you're searching on the text. The text has to be retrieved from somewhere. And in this case, we often see documents that have photos, images, all sorts of strange tables, meaning that we need some kind of computer vision parser to get the text out reliably across all of the different documents that we have. A lot of those documents are also not in English, right? So we need to translate them. That again, we do through clouds translation. And then there is a long list of documents that happens when you search for a term, for example, just transition. But that list is not random, right? Ranking for relevance is something that requires a not trivial amount of intelligence. And so if you are doing a Google search versus asking a large language model, both are using AI. They're just using AI at different ends of the spectrum, right? And so I think in applying the principles, differentiating more between model size is also useful. And then finally, these kinds of norms and guidelines are always a starting point, I think. And so if we want to start using these, if we want to make sure that they're useful in practice, what we really need to be doing is building a community around them. And so I hope that as you're reading the guidelines, as you're reading the principles, and as you're maybe listening to me talk, right, you get some ideas of things to try, and that when you have tried them, you will also share the results with the people in the room so that we can build on these, see what kinds of rules are essential, and have norms emerge from that. So that means you need to start sending me emails. I put my email on the screen here. Very happy to answer any kinds of questions, collaborate, you name it. Shoot me an email, and I hope you guys have fun during the presentations.
Okay. So, a lot of good points, a lot were pertinent. Thank you, Anne. Now I'd like to invite Susie Moser to give some interventions. She also gave some highly interesting and instructive and also strong views on the provenance of AI. Lipstick was used as a term. She's an independent scholar and a consultant who focuses really on climate change at the science policy interaction, communication, psychosocial resilience in the face of traumatic and transformative challenges associated with climate change, is co-editor with Max Boykoff of a prize-winning edited volume on successful adaptation. And building on that foundational work, she created the resiliencemetrics.org toolkit. So she knows metrics quite well and evaluation. Over to you, Susie.
Thanks so much, Carl. And maybe because you just mentioned resiliencemetrics.org, in case anybody is trying to look that up, it is currently on dock to be refurbished. So in case you're looking for it, come back in a couple months until we've figured it out. But so to the point, Yeah, I guess maybe I just want to start with appreciation that you continue to invite me back, even though I am so critical of this entire enterprise, which is, something to be said for what IPAM does and how it approaches these things. And I haven't changed my mind. Just because you revised them, I haven't changed my mind. So I'll say a couple of comments. One of the things that I said back then was, these principles aren't user-driven or co-produced, really. And even though you made some comments about that, the survey that you conducted is not co-production. That informs the document, but it has actually not changed a single one of your principles, as far as I can see. And so I strongly urge you, as you go forward, to actually involve people who know something about transdisciplinarity and how to do co-production in the development and the critical evaluation of whatever you've put forward. So that's number one. A second one is one that wasn't there in the first round of this document, and I just was so surprised. You have a lovely looking graphic in there that is called AI-driven climate adaptation cycle. AI-driven. We have gone from human augmentation to AI-driven. What happened? Yes, AI is now being used in all these other steps, but I think that's a profound problem because it contradicts your very basic first principle of what you should do, which is not to replace human cognition and human intervention and decision making. It is now driven by, and unfortunately, that's so fundamentally the case, right? It is now driving so much of the thinking and the non-thinking in adaptation and is deeply problematic. I urge you to revise that document even as you have launched it today. So that's a big piece for me. It's simply inconsistent within your own, it creates an inconsistency with your own document when you say we should not replace humans in that. We should have humans driven adaptation assisted by, if we actually agree with that in the first place. Okay, next comment that I want to make has to do with what you recognize, which is just so difficult, so very difficult, maybe even impossible to check compliance and accountability to the principles. One of the principal things, in my view, that drives the use of AI is that it supposedly makes our life easier on a very superficial level, right? People who don't have high capacity, let me just put it into Claude or Chat GPT and see what they say, and let's go with that. And what you're doing is you're basically, with not just the principles, but with the implementation guidance, is you make life harder again. So for people who have capacity limits, you're asking them to use some of their very scarce capacity to basically work against the convenience of AI. So there is something really deeply problematic with, how to implement them, given the deep driver of what brings people to AI, if they're even conscious of it, as you pointed out, and as Anna just pointed out, it's embedded in pretty much everything right now. But so that adding that burdens of responsible implementation undermines the very, the attraction of AI. And for a group like IPAM that is really interested in metrics and measurable ways to, see how well something is going, to come up with principles that can't be actually tracked and like quantitatively tracked. How are they being used? How widely are they adopted? It's really problematic. I love the comment that Anne just made about, if you want them to be used, form a user group. To actually see how well is it going, and that feeds back into my first comment, to actually have them be grounded in user reality. So there's a lot there, but for me, they still feel, given all the things that they're not touching, the ethical considerations and how the language models were developed, the governance that so much of, for example, to place data centers that support all the data storage and processing of these models are now implemented in oftentimes EJ communities, and undermining democratic principles of how to do, like all of that stuff is not there. And I just find it really problematic. You have the capacity issues. I think you actually, through the use of AI, and there's a growing body of studies now out there, is how our cognitive abilities, our thinking capacities are declining and diminishing. Just a couple days ago, a paper came out on cognitive surrender and the loss of critical thinking. So the very fact that you're just basically putting guardrails around something that fundamentally undermines our ability to deal with the growing complexity of climate change and the polycrisis doesn't, for me, there's still a fundamental problem. So I can go on and on. The environmental impacts, from what it does to energy use, water use, land use, habitat destruction, noise, and so on and so forth. It is fundamental. AI is fundamentally maladaptive in my view. For this purpose. So, having said that, I would recommend that you commit to becoming a critical voice for ethical application, or ethical adaptation and MERL, not necessarily just a sort of putting some responsible bounds around a fundamentally flawed problem. I really want to encourage you to be more courageous than you already are. Rigorously studying, not just using a few case examples that somebody submits to you, but very rigorously and critically collecting evidence of how AI is used in the entire adaptation process, what the benefits and limitations and failures are, to monitor and critically assess how the principles are taken up or not, taking a more comprehensive look at the whole problem, not just, once you get to that piece of it. And really to not be afraid to take a more courageous stance. You are in places at the UN level, at the international level, where you can be very influential. And I feel like you're falling short. You're falling short of what you could do if you took a more comprehensive look. And I just simply want to appreciate, again, where I started, that you uphold an atmosphere for critical exchange around these issues. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Susie. I really want you to stay in this debate. I really do. I mean, seriously, because these are valid points. I don't agree with every one of them, but it's usually a matter of degree, not spirit, right? And so we need these voices, and we need your expertise as well. So please stay with us. Thank you very much.
I'll try.
And also another thing is, so far everything we've done is volunteers.
Yeah.
I would love if we could get a detailed evidence-based understanding. There's so many things we could do if we could come up with some proposals that could take forward and then champion them. So yes, thank you very much. Last but not least is Mohammed El Gabri, who serves as the director of the African Disaster Mitigation Research Center at the National Research Institute of Astronomy and Geophysics in Cairo. With over 2 decades of extensive experience in natural hazards modeling and monitoring, his distinguished career encompasses both academic teaching and professional consultancy, making a lot of contributions to the disaster mitigation risk management space in Africa and beyond, and has a considerable amount of applied experience on maybe I could argue the sort of the harder side of AI and machine learning related to big data and things like that. So over to you for the last comments of the session.
Thank you, Carl, and thank you for all the speakers and for Samaraj for the presentations. It's always very interesting to talk and discuss this topic with you. First, I would like to acknowledge the significant progress we had since the previous version. In particular, I appreciate very much clear definition between the intended users, especially distinction between deployers and end users. This is very important. I remain concerned, of course, about the fundamental issue of implementation. even with these very well articulated responsible AI principles, applying them in many climate adaptation contexts, particularly in low and middle income countries, will remain extremely challenging. In many of these settings, institutions operate with very limited technical capacities, um, as well as fragmented governance, insufficient digital infrastructure, incomplete and low quality data. So these are precisely the environment where climate risks are often highest. Yet there are also where the implementation and responsible AI is likely to must be difficult or let's say challenging. Interestingly, the survey, you shared the result with us. It's very interesting to see how concerns about data quality, about human oversight, this is very important principles and among the very difficult implementation challenging as well. Uh, so, but saying so, it's we should notice that AI is advancing at extraordinary pace. It's very fast. It's becoming an integral part of the everything, including climate services, risk assessment, adaptation planning. So whether we like it, whether we embrace it or not, adaptation, the AI will come to adaptation matrix, and therefore we need to focus on identifying. We need to not to focus only on identifying risks, but I believe our next priority should be ensuring that these principles, what you offer today, can actually be implemented by the people and the institutions. I would like to emphasize on two priorities in the next phase. The first is the practical implementation. The principles should evolve beyond high-level recommendations into practical guidance that can be used by project team, government agency, NGO, evaluators, funding organizations. It could include implementation checklist, decision support tool, risk screening templates, government guidance, maturity assessment framework, many forms which used to deploy AI in a responsible way. Different institution has different capacities, so the guidance should also be scalable. What is visible for a national meteorological services in a high-income country may not be realistic for a local authority or humanitarian organization working in fragile or in conflict areas. The second point, which I would like to stress, is the balance and realistic testing. So the proposed pilot use cases shouldn't focus only on technically mature environment where high quality data and strong governance already exist. They should also deliberately include a challenging adaptation context, low data environment, resource constrained institution, rapidly evolving disaster situation. So this difficult setting are not exceptional. They are the case where we are really in need for adaptation matrices. So finally, I would like to emphasize responsible AI shouldn't become another barrier that unintentionally widens the gap between countries with advanced technical capacities and those that facing greatest climate vulnerability. Instead, instead of this, these principles should enable equitable access to transverse AI by recognizing different implementation contexts. I look forward to contributing to the next phase of this work and helping to ensure these principles become not only responsible, but also practical, inclusive, genuinely usable. And I will stop here for now.
You muted,
I think you
Carl.
are muted.
You
Thank
muted,
you.
Carl.
Thank you. Your implementation concerns were a good way of ending. because it's a practical way of thinking about, well, what's next, right? So very much appreciate all of those comments. We're at the hour. Couple of things here real quick. If people have written up questions, we're going to answer them, okay? We are going to answer any question you put into the...
I am happy to add 15 minutes if needed. People can raise their hand to ask questions, and we'll give them the floor.
Does anyone want that? I don't want us to jeopardize time in anyone. This is the official close, right? This is the official close right now. But I really want all of you who have joined to let the world know that we're working on this, and we're not going to give up quite yet. Actually, no, this is just the beginning. And if you do have any questions, I'm certainly available to spend a few more minutes, but it's completely optional for any one of the discussants or anyone of or Samraj. But you know, I can stay here for a bit longer if there's any value in that. Otherwise, I just want to mention that if you're not a member of IPAM and you're interested in these issues, join IPAM, and so that you can be a part of the task group that's going to work on these going forward. There's a lot of work to do. I'd like us to come up with some proposals to do even more work, but just think of these 4 work streams. We need a broad, diverse group. We do need for transdisciplinarity in co-production, totally. And so for that, we need everyone who has a vested interest, potentially a stake, and all of us have a stake in this, to play a role in our further work. And you can go to this link here if you want to join IPAM. It's not, we don't charge any money or anything like that. And you don't have to do anything more than sign up to our charter that has certain ethical things that we want you to agree to. And then if you have any questions regarding the principles, please feel free to contact Samraj or to contact me. And we are pleased as punch to further discuss these issues. So with that, this is the official closure. But if anyone wants to spend some time talking, I see Susie's hands up, and so it's not quite yet the official closure. Susie?
Yeah, so I can stay on for a couple minutes, but I have a question actually for Samraj. Since you're an AR7 author, I'm wondering, how is IPCC addressing the entry of AI in in the literature, in research, and including in this topic that we're talking here about, and how will what we're doing here in any way enter, if it does enter, IPCC discussions?
Yeah, IPCC has come up with a minimal kind of a guideline for the authors, that how much, if they are using after every the draft submission, we have to give a kind of a disclosure that what kind of an AI have been used to the technical support units. So they have come up with a bare minimum kind of this principles, but not a very stringent one, or not something that could which I think that could be very helpful for the authors, because authors do struggle, and for the to find a boundary that where they can stop using AI or where they can use the AI, something of that sort. So this can be, the principles that we have here can be very useful for it, because they are still, as far as I know, they are looking for a broader kind of a overarching principles that could be applied across the working groups. And they have a separate this AI unit, and I'm also part of it. So we are just each chapter has to make a summation that what all AI, that how they have used the AI, whether it's used for figure, whether it's used for text. Text is definitely not allowed, but literature search is allowed. So something like that as a very bare minimum, but they want to update it, because the problem is that, especially when it comes to the review, when it goes to the external reviewer, there's no way to stop the reviewers from uploading the document to the AI and get the review comments. So based on my experience, I mean, the last, this LAM 2 that we had in Bahamas, there was quite a discussion about the another SR cities report, the special report on cities. So what happened that they received in the this review round around 45,000 to 48,000 kind review comments, and some of single author coming up with maybe 1,000, 1,200 comments. So that was clearly a case of an AI, and it's a real concern, and everybody's struggling that how to stop it. But there's no way. And so there's the TSU, the co-chairs, they are all decided to come up with a principle. And I do see that we have the principle that we have designed and formulated can be, in a way, I mean, very helpful for the guidance. Because the guidance that presently they have, that's a very bare minimum kind of a thing. So that doesn't take care of everything. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that shows the need. Do we have any questions from the participants? Well, maybe having an extended session was a moot point, but I would hope that we were at least somewhat provocative. And, you know, we don't know completely what we should be doing. That's why we want to learn from you your perspectives on use of AI, use of the outputs of AI, worries, enthusiasm. One comment I have had is that so many people commented on the principles document. Why is it so negative? Why is it so much on what you shouldn't do? Why don't you talk about all the great things that AI can do? Does anyone have a perspective that we're somehow being too down on it? I don't think so, but I'd love to hear from you.
Well, everybody here has the possibility to raise your hand if you wish to talk.
Well,
I'm happy to comment on it, just to say, I've heard institutions say that there are processes that in the past, in the manual way they have conducted them, has taken them days and days to give someone an answer who needed an urgent answer, whereas AI could do that in a very short amount of time. I have heard people say, there are many, many organizations who cannot afford the $10,000, $100,000 consultant, and for a small fee they can get essentially a ready-made adaptation plan. I have profound problems with that, but maybe a bad adaptation plan, one could argue, is better than no adaptation plan. In the vast majority of the world that can't afford that. I don't know. I mean, I personally find that abhorrent, and to me, there is a profound problem with undermining the availability of publicly available data and now making it available at a cost. Whatever. There's all those issues, right? But that argument has been made, and maybe that's great. I don't know. It doesn't undermine my argument about the fundamental maladaptive approach to this technology in the first place, as it undermines what we're trying to actually adapt to or make that worse. But, maybe there are great things like that. People write great songs with AI.
Yeah, well, right. Yeah. You know how good that can be. But I guess a question for the discussants here is, okay, we're premising at least two things. One, that AI is inevitable. The other is there needs to be some human element. I mean, I take to heart we probably shouldn't have called the AI driven. We should have probably used a different term. And if we change the terminology, keep it there. I don't know if that solves for your concern over the AI driven terminology or the substance of what's behind it. But what do you think in terms of the inevitability question regarding AI in application for adaptation, broadly or specifically to metrics and Merle, which is sort of almost kind of a coal face for it, because that's where the data is something that AI can mess with in a way that perhaps there's some other areas where it's less naturally, something you'd be thinking about. So I don't know if you have perspectives on that inevitability question.
I do, but I dominate the conversation, so I'll leave it to other people to say.
Well, does anyone, or Mohammed? I mean, you work with AI, have worked with AI for some time, longer than most of us. I mean, what's your perspective?
Maybe I would comment about the point of why we are looking to the negative sides always of AI. I think the main always for anything new we have fears. The problem with AI is that it's really accelerating. It's beyond our ability to base. So we have to chase. No way. Each day there is new models, new technologies, new ways of how you infer, RAG, adapt the system, build your LLM model. It's really challenging. So part of it is a challenge that we are not able to pace with the development. Even us as a researchers, it's really challenging. The other side is how magnificent things you can do with. So you can imagine how bad things you can do with as well. So it's really a very powerful tool that can leave us very much, and it can bring us back for for decades. So that's the main issue. Maybe in the first webinar, and maybe today a bit, I was the most skeptical about how we can implement, how we can avoid this thing. But to be frankly, already right now I'm running 4 models doing things and agents doing things for me. Without them, I would need 4 or 5 postdocs working with me doing these things. So today is much more easier, and you can use more intellectual abilities of humans into much more innovative things. But what I can say is that we should continue. What you are doing is something very important. We should push it maybe faster. We are not on the same base we need to be. We need to work. As Susie highlighted about the data and low quality, we need to work with the data. But we need to understand our limitation. We need to understand our uncertainty. And in this way, and this is something we should reflect also in the on the guidelines. Understanding our limitation is very important.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. There's this element of change also. There's inevitability means you're looking at something in the future. We have right now. The reason why I have this background is I'm not in my office because it's too hot up there, and so I wanted to be somewhere different where I wouldn't be sweating. I could wear a shirt like this. And this is London, you know.
Adaptation, you are adapting.
I'm adapting. That's right. That's right. Yes, and this is now. June was hottest on record for Europe ever by far, by just not just a tiny margin. It wasn't just a little bit above some 2012 number. It was way beyond. We're dealing with what would be 1,000-year sort of heat type incident just happened, you know. So that's changing. Meanwhile, I follow this AI space enough to know that people are using year 2028, year 2030, maybe some go far out to say 2035. We're going to be dealing with this AI that is going to be so beyond what we're dealing with today. And also, I do note in my application of AI, some elements like hallucinations seem to be less apparent than they were even 12 months ago. So we're dealing with two trajectories right there. How do we engage with this? How do we engage with trying to manage the fact that things are changing with the principles, but also just as adaptation experts? And I see Susie, I'm looking forward to your feedback on that, if not something else.
Well, so one point about, the comment about you're adapting, you're adjusting to, you're not adapting, you're adjusting currently to a heat extreme. And it is, to me, just a real cognitive dissonance how we can agree to a technology apparently as inevitable that is fundamentally undermining our progress in replacing the fossil fuel driven energy sources with renewables. I mean, if basically in the US at least, it has completely taken up that space, the progress we have made by the increased demand for electricity to power these data centers. So number one, I mean, how can we pursue a technology that makes us, that makes the problem worse and just say, oh, let's just make sure we're using it responsibly. It is fundamentally flawed. In using it, we are undermining responsibility and ethics. So that to me is the hardest one to crack in all of this. The fact that we're saying it is inevitable seeds a form of human control over the technology that we are all claiming we still have. Like, we can stop using it right now. We don't have to. It was human created madness, and it is just now taking over by making it so sugary to use it. It's, it's embedded in things where we don't even have choice. It takes hours to undo all the settings in your technology if you want to minimize it at least. So all of these things are to say, there is a very vested interest part of industry that is trying to pursue this and shove it down our throats, that has never ever shown regard for humans, for equity, for responsibility, for ethics, for the environment. So I don't know. I feel like it stokes my resistance to this type of approach to using up the planet. I mean, do we have to have it like in the first chapter of the Ministry of the Future where 20 million people in India die? I don't know. It just feels like, we're already not even having it in the news that it's 130 degrees in India. I'm sorry, that is just not acceptable. And we're just stoking it with using this technology. So to me, this no, I don't have to participate. I have choices. I'm going to use that choice. I'm not going to just submit to it just because everybody else does so. So that's the courage that I want you to have to say. If you're working on adaptation, keep making adaptation possible, not by putting fuel on the fire. So anyway, I have to leave, unfortunately.
Okay,
I have another meeting. So
thanks for that. So look forward to the next time. I do
Yeah.
hope. Yeah. Okay.
Take care.
Take care. All right.
Bye.